For over a century, we thought we knew the story of the Titanic. But new evidence reveals what really happened that night is far more shocking than the iceberg itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Tonight, we are tackling a tragedy that has, well, it's really become the ultimate maritime myth, hasn't it? The sinking of the RMS Titanic.
It looms so large in our imagination.
Absolutely. And we're aiming to move past the movie script, cut through maybe a century of speculation. We're diving deep into the raw reports, the forensic science, the technical documents you provided.
Yeah, our mission here is, well, it's ambitious. We're really analyzing the entire chain of failure, everything from the industrial context, how the ship was even built, right up to those final fatal emissions on that cold April night in 1912.
Looking for where things went wrong.
Exactly. We want to identify where that sort of technological hubris, that confidence, met with plain old human error.
Right. So we're going to examine the myth of her supposed invincibility. We'll look at the critical timeline, those ignored warnings, the communication failures. We'll talk about the definitive evidence pointing to, well, a crucial, almost microscopic structural weakness that seems to have doomed the ship.
And the human side, too. The chilling sociological tragedy of who got rescued and who didn't.
It's just heartbreaking. This isn't just a story about hitting an iceberg, is it? It feels much more like a story about a society's misplaced confidence, maybe, in its own engineering.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. To really get the Titanic, you absolutely have to place her in context. This was the golden age of ocean liners, a time of just unprecedented industrial competition.
Especially on that Atlantic route.
Oh, hugely lucrative, yeah. The North Atlantic route. The sources you gave us indicate something like 368 ships were operating on that route in just the decade before 1912.
Wow.
It was a critical economic highway, like a floating pipeline for people and money.
And right at the center of it all, this massive rivalry, White Star Line, who built Titanic, versus the Cunard Line.
That's the big one. Cunard had these famous flagships like the Mauretania. She held a blue riband, the speed record, clocking in at, 26 knots?
Really fast for the time. So White Star knew they couldn't just compete on speed.
Precisely. The Titanic and her sisters, the Olympic class, they were built for dominance another way. Through sheer luxury, incredible scale, comfort. She wasn't designed to be a Greyhound. She was meant to be a floating palace.
And the scale was just immense, 269 meters long.
Huge. If you want a modern comparison, think almost 4 times the length of a Boeing 747. Just massive. Her maximum speed was around 23 knots. Respectable, definitely, but slower than the Cunard rivals.
So the design was about conveying this feeling of, immovable security. Opulence?
Exactly. Stable, secure, luxurious. This was basically industrial warfare, but waged through architecture and engineering.
And she was the second of 3, right? Olympic, Titanic, and the Gigantic.
Which they later renamed Titanic, yeah. After the disaster, Gigantic probably seemed a bit much. The goal was really to cement White Star's monopoly on that luxury transatlantic trade, make the competition look old-fashioned, almost irrelevant.
The construction itself in Belfast took 3 years.
3 years, yeah. A Herculean effort. And tragically, it cost lives even then. 8 workers died during the build phase alone.
Just building her.
Yeah. The resulting hull, though, it was seen as a monument to industrial confidence. 2,000 plates of flexible steel, held together by, wait for it, 3 million wrought iron rivets.
3 million. And the design internally was supposed to be the safest ever.
That was the claim. She had 15 independent watertight bulkheads. These are basically vertical walls meant to contain flooding if there's a breach.
And they had modern features.
Oh yeah, very advanced for the time. Automatic doors on these bulkheads that could supposedly be sealed instantly right from the bridge. The press saw all this spectacle of engineering, and they quickly dubbed her unsinkable.
That word, it just stuck, didn't it? Became her defining myth.
It really did. But the safety reality check, when you look at it, is just jarring.
The lifeboats.
The lifeboats, yeah. Despite carrying over 2,200 people, passengers, and crew combined, the ship was only equipped with 20 lifeboats.
20, which was enough for.
Only about half the people on board. Roughly 1,178 spots, I think.
It seems like stunning negligence looking back. Just criminal.
It does. But the sources are really clear on this. This capacity, believe it or not, complied precisely with the regulations at the time. They were ridiculously outdated from 1894.
Based on weight, not people.
Exactly. Based on the ship's tonnage, not the actual number of souls aboard. The sheer size of the Titanic had just completely outrun the regulations. So the hubris of that unsinkable label, it was almost written into the law itself in a way.
Wow. But someone must have known better.
Oh, absolutely. And we know this hubris was challenged, at least internally. Thomas Andrews, the ship's actual constructor from Harland and Wolff.
He was on board for the maiden voyage, wasn't he?
He was. And he was keenly aware of the limitations of his own design. He knew that if more than 4 of those 15 watertight compartments flooded, the ship was doomed. The mathematics were clear to him.
So unsinkable was really just marketing.
Pretty much. A very powerful, very effective marketing slogan. But Andrews knew the truth.
Okay, let's pivot a bit to the human element. The voyage itself. Departed Southampton, April 10th, 1912.
Yep. And she wasn't even full, sailing about 2/3 capacity, carrying 1,343 passengers. And that passenger list, it was like a floating microcosm of global society at the time.
You see the class divisions so clearly.
Oh, incredibly clearly. The financial disparity was just staggering. You see it acutely in the ticket prices. A first-class cabin, like the suite occupied by this newlywed couple, Mary and Lucian Smith.
How much did that cost?
£60. Which sounds maybe not huge now, but today that translates to nearly 6,000 euros.
6,000 euros for a one-way ticket.
An unimaginable sum for most people back then.
And then third class, steerage.
Just £2. A ticket for third class, often families, single men hoping for a new life in America, cost just £2.
And what did that represent?
The £2 was about half a month's wage for a common laborer at the time.
Half a month's wages. So the physical distance on the ship, the decks, the locked gates, it reflected this enormous social distance too.
Absolutely. Separated by decks, access points, even those locked gates you mentioned, which had immigration implications too.
Right. And these were real people, like Mary Smith. You mentioned she was pregnant.
Yes, pregnant, returning to her family in New York. The sources really highlight this contrast. Passengers experiencing the absolute pinnacle of Edwardian luxury, totally unaware of the structural and operational issues already plaguing the ship before it even left the dock.
That's a really chilling part, isn't it? The pre-voyage problems. Let's talk about the fire.
Ah, yes. The coal bunker fire. This is critical. There are reports, pretty well documented, that a fire had been smoldering, burning actually, in coal bunker number 5 for about 12 days leading up to departure.
12 days, and the crew knew.
Oh, they knew. They'd been battling it, trying to extinguish it by transferring the coal out and hosing it down.
Yeah.
Though the fire eventually subsided, experts believe that the intense, prolonged heat likely warped a crucial internal wall. A bulkhead. Specifically, bulkheads 5 and 6, right there in the forepart of the ship.
The part that would hit the ice first.
Exactly. And here's where you see maybe the first catastrophic, profit-driven decision. This ship cost the modern equivalent of, what, 150 million euros.
It's a fortune.
Delaying the maiden voyage for a proper inspection. That would have been an astronomical financial hit for the White Star Line. Bad press, lost revenue, schedule disruption.
So they didn't inspect it.
No. Instead of delaying departure to really check the integrity of that potentially damaged bulkhead number 5, the decision was made to defer the examination until the ship returned to Belfast after the voyage.
Wow.
So this decision to proceed, essentially at full speed, despite a known potential structural risk in the very section of the hull that would first encounter any underwater hazard, it was, looking back, an act of catastrophic negligence. Driven purely by the commercial schedule. Prioritizing punctuality over safety, even before they hit the ice.
That seems to be the case. A pattern was already setting in.
Okay, so let's move to the voyage itself. The man at the center of the operational decisions, Captain Edward Smith. Yes, a very experienced captain, 62 years old, a veteran. This was supposed to be his final voyage before retiring. Go out on a high note with this magnificent ship.
But the conditions were tricky, weren't they? There was ice about.
Very tricky. The sources indicate it had been an unusually mild winter, which sounds counterintuitive, but it meant more icebergs breaking off Greenland and drifting south into the shipping lanes than usual, heavy, low-lying ice.
Despite that, Smith kept the speed high, 21.5 knots.
He did. His rationale, as far as we can reconstruct it, seems to have been driven by a mix of commercial pressure and maybe professional pride. He wanted that punctual, triumphant arrival in New York.
Even though they knew about the ice, hadn't they already shifted course?
They had. The course was already shifted slightly south due to ice warnings, which actually added about 320 kilometers to the trip. But Smith calculated that by maintaining that high speed, he could still make up the time.
It sounds reckless now, but was it unusual then?
That's the crucial context. We have to be careful not to judge him purely by today's standards. The sources clarify that in 1912, it was actually pretty standard practice, though it sounds insane to us, for captains to steer into known ice fields and just try to power through them quickly.
Trusting the ship's strength.
Exactly. They trusted the robust construction of their ships to withstand danger, believing they could just sort of brush aside smaller pieces of ice or spot the big ones in time. So Smith wasn't necessarily acting like a rogue captain. He was operating within the established, frankly dangerous norms of his time.
You can see the pressure in the logs, too, right? Posting the daily mileage.
Yeah, absolutely. They posted the daily mileage logs, 878 kilometers covered on day 3 alone. It just demonstrates that intense overriding focus on maintaining the schedule, maybe setting a new speed record for the maiden voyage.
But they weren't flat out.
Interestingly, no, not quite maximum speed. 2 of the 29 boilers weren't even fully fired up yet. So Smith prioritized the schedule over, say, maximum safety margins, but he still held some reserve power. He wasn't pushing her to the absolute limit.
Okay, so speed is one factor. What about communication? This is where it gets really critical, right?
Absolutely shocking, yeah. The radio operators, John Phillips and Harold Bride, they were busy, really busy. But their primary job, you have to remember, wasn't safety communication.
It was for the passengers.
Primarily, yes. Handling paid passenger messages, telegrams, essentially relayed via the Marconi station in Cape Race, Newfoundland, which was about 725 kilometers away. Radio was a luxury service first, a safety tool second. That was the mindset.
And they were getting ice warnings.
Multiple warnings throughout the day from various ships, but the most catastrophic failure happens around 10 p.m. that night, 22.00 ship's time.
This is the Californian message?
Exactly. Yeah. The SS Californian, another ship nearby, was actually stopped for the night because it was surrounded by ice. They sent an urgent ice warning to the Titanic. But because the Californian was so close,
The signal was too strong.
way too strong, it blasted into Phillips' headset so loudly it apparently temporarily deafened him with static.
Oh, wow. So what did Phillips do?
Phillips, who was already stressed trying to clear this backlog of paid passenger traffic for Cape Race, basically got annoyed. He abruptly told the Californian operator, Cyril Evans, to shut up, I am busy, I am working Cape Race. Essentially, get off the frequency.
He just dismissed it.
Dismissed it curtly.
Yeah.
And Evans, on the Californian, maybe feeling he'd done his bit or just rebuffed, then did something crucial. He shut down his radio set and went to bed.
So the warning never got to the bridge.
Never got logged, never reached Captain Smith. But here's a twist, a technicality that came out in the inquiries later and complicates the blame game.
What's that?
Evans' warning message, the one from the Californian, it lacked a mandatory 3-letter prefix, MSG.
MSG. What did that mean?
It stood for Master Servicegram. That prefix legally signified that the message contained vital navigational information specifically addressed to the captain or the bridge. It was a priority flag.
And because it didn't have MSG.
Because the warning wasn't formally addressed or formatted correctly according to the strict Marconi protocols of the time, Phillips was technically allowed to ignore it, or at least deprioritize it, in favor of the paid commercial traffic he was handling.
It wasn't just Phillips being annoyed, it was also Evans not following protocol.
Exactly. The blame isn't solely on Phillips's impatience or workload. It's also on Evans for failing to correctly format and perhaps insist on the importance of his message. The difference between just another piece of radio chatter and an urgent, actionable warning came down to those 3 letters, MSG.
That failure of protocol, deadly consequences.
Absolutely, which leads us directly to lookouts.
Right. High up in the crow's nest, Reginald Lee and Fred Fleet.
Yep, positioned about 30 meters above the bridge. But they were missing something vital, binoculars. Unbelievably, the ship's binoculars had been left locked in a cupboard back in Southampton. The officer who had the key, David Blair, was transferred off the ship at the last minute and apparently just forgot to hand over the key.
You couldn't make it up. So they were relying just on our eyes, no searchlight.
No searchlight either. Using one was considered bad practice on the open ocean because it could blind the navigation of other ships. So yes, they were relying entirely on their naked eyes in the dark.
And at 23.39.
Fleet spots it. A dark mass ahead. But it's incredibly close, only about 450 meters away.
How much time did that give them?
Less than a minute, maybe 37 seconds, some estimate, before impact.
Just seconds. Now, experts have looked at the conditions that night, haven't they?
They have, simulated them quite precisely. And the sources highlight several factors making it exceptionally difficult. First, there was no moonlight, a moonless night.
Okay.
Second, the sea was unnaturally calm, like glass, which sounds nice, but it meant there were no breaking waves at the base of the iceberg. Normally, that white water would help silhouette it.
Right, you'd see the surf.
Exactly. Third, the severe cold, the wind chill, would have affected the lookouts' vision, made their eyes water. And they were looking for what's called blue or black ice, that doesn't reflect light easily against a black star-filled sky. Incredibly difficult.
So the missing binoculars,
Yeah.
maybe not the smoking gun they sound like?
It sounds like a massive, inexcusable blunder, and it was certainly negligent not to have them accessible. But many expert analyses now suggest they likely wouldn't have made a critical difference in spotting the iceberg sooner.
Why not?
Binoculars back then were generally intended for examining objects after they'd been sighted with the naked eye, to get detail, not for constantly scanning the horizon in the dark. They reduced the field of vision. So the human eye, despite its limitations, was the primary scanning tool. But on that specific night, the combination of the ignored MSG protocol, meaning no heightened alert, and the extremely difficult visual conditions, it was just lethal.
A fatal combination of factors lining up.
Precise.
So 23.39, the alarm comes from the crow's nest. Iceberg right ahead. What happens on the bridge?
First Officer Murdoch is on duty. He reacts instantly, orders the helm hard to starboard, which actually means turn the ship hard to port, to the left, and simultaneously orders the engines reversed, full astern.
Trying to turn and slow down at the same time?
Exactly. But the physics of a ship this enormous, it's just brutal. At 21.5 knots, the Titanic needed something like 800 meters just to come to a complete stop, and probably over 1.5 kilometers to turn sharply, say 45 degrees.
And the iceberg was only 450 meters away.
Less than 500 meters, yeah. It was an impossible situation from the moment fleet saw it. There just wasn't enough time or space.
So at 23.40, impact.
Impact. The Titanic scrapes along the submerged part of the iceberg on the ship's starboard side, the right side. The impact itself, according to survivors, wasn't necessarily a huge violent crash. More like a shudder, a grinding noise. Some barely noticed it.
But below decks?
Below decks, the reality was immediate and terrifying. The first snoker, Fred Barrett, who was down in Boiler Room 6, saw it instantly. A red warning lamp flashed, and he saw seawater surging in through a seam in the hull on the starboard side.
He knew straight away.
Oh, yeah. Captain Smith was quickly informed, went down to assess. He realized very quickly the damage wasn't localized. It affected the entire front section of the ship. Within just 10 minutes, the water in the forward compartments was already 4.5 meters high, flooding rapidly.
Now, this is where the story gets really interesting regarding the type of damage. The initial belief was wrong, wasn't it?
Dramatically wrong, yeah. The initial inquiries, based on survivor accounts and calculations at the time, estimated that the ship must have sustained this massive continuous gash, maybe 90 meters long, cutting across 5, maybe even 6 compartments.
And 5 was the magic number.
5 was more than she could handle. The design could cope with the first 4 flooding, but not 5. So this idea of a long gash became the standard story, the myth almost. The iceberg slicing her open like a can opener.
But when they found the wreck in '85...
everything changed. When Dr. Ballard found the wreck in 1985 and subsequent expeditions used remotely operated vehicles to examine the hull damage up close, they found absolutely no evidence of a single long gash. None at all.
So what was the damage actually like?
It consisted of multiple, relatively small piers, punctures, and indentations along the line of contact, concentrated where the steel hull plates overlapped and were riveted together. Not a slice, more like a series of popped seams and dents over a long area.
And this modern analysis, it helped clear up some other theories too, like the coal bunker fire being the main cause.
It did. That boiler fire theory suggested the fire in Bunker 5 had critically weakened Bulkhead 5, causing it to collapse much sooner than it should have, accelerating the sinking.
Makes sense on the surface.
It does. But the forensic evidence from the wreck and analysis of pumping records showed the water was already being actively pumped from compartment 5 very early on. That means the initial water ingress must have started elsewhere, further forward, even earlier. The failure of Bulkhead 5 seems to have happened later in the sequence, not right at the beginning. The fire likely contributed, weakened it, but wasn't the primary cause of the fatal flooding sequence across 5 compartments.
Okay. And what about the physics? Does the small holes theory match the sinking time?
Perfectly. This is where the long gash theory really falls apart. Ship architects and marine engineers calculated that for the amount of water that flooded in, roughly 34,470 tons, over the known sinking time of about 2 hours and 40 minutes.
A 90-meter gash would be too big.
Way too big. That scale of damage would have sunk the ship in under an hour, maybe even faster. The actual total surface area of all the openings, spread across those first 5 or 6 compartments, was calculated to be only about 1.2 square meters.
1.2 square meters, that's tiny, like the size of...
a medium-sized office desk, roughly, spread out over the length of nearly 100 meters.
Wow. So how could such small openings sink such a massive ship? This leads us to the rivets, doesn't it?
Exactly. This is what's truly fascinating. The disaster ultimately came down to a small, almost invisible technical detail that only modern metallurgical science could really uncover. Experts like Tim Feeke and Dr. Jennifer Hopper McCarthy did forensic tests on actual pieces of the hull recovered from the wreck site.
And what did they find about the steel? Was it bad?
Surprisingly, no. The steel plating itself was found to be of pretty good quality for 1912 standards. Maybe a bit more brittle in the cold than modern steel, but not inherently faulty. The fault wasn't in the steel plates themselves.
It was in how they were joined together, the rivets.
Precisely. The weakness was in those 3 million rivets. Specifically, the rivets used in the sections of the hull that were joined manually, by hand, not by the giant hydraulic riveting machine used amidships.
Where couldn't the machine reach?
Mainly in the sharply curved sections at the very front, the bow, and also at the stern. In these areas, the builders used wrought iron rivets, not the higher-grade steel rivets used on the main body of the hull.
Wrought iron. Why use a weaker material there?
It was easier to heat and hammer into place by hand in those awkward curved sections. Steel rivets required the immense force of the hydraulic machine, but this choice, using wrought iron in those critical forward sections, introduced a vulnerability.
Okay, but wrought iron was used in shipbuilding, wasn't it?
It was, but there's more to it. To try and compensate for wrought iron being inherently less strong than steel, workers added something called slag tiny glass-like particles into the molten iron during manufacturing. This was supposed to make the iron a bit more workable, more ductile.
But something went wrong with the slag.
That's what the analysis of the recovered rivets showed, a fatal flaw in the manufacturing process itself. The slag content in many of the wrought iron rivets used specifically in the Titanic's bow section was found to be too high, and it was distributed unevenly in large concentrations.
What did that do to the rivets?
Instead of increasing durability, this high concentration of slag made the wrought iron rivets weak and, critically, very brittle, especially when exposed to the extreme cold of the North Atlantic water that night.
Brittle rivets in the part of the ship that hit the ice?
Exactly. And they tested this theory. Engineers conducted this really compelling experiment. They reconstructed a section of the Titanic's hull using rivets manufactured to the same flawed specifications with that high slag content. Then they subjected it to the kind of sideways pressure the iceberg would have exerted.
What was the pressure calculated to be?
Over 965 bar of pressure. A huge force.
And what happened in the experiment?
The result was stark. The high slag wrought iron rivets failed dramatically at only around 690 bar of pressure.
They just snapped.
We literally popped, the heads snapped off, or the shanks broke. They just couldn't take the stress, especially in the cold.
So wait, 690 bar failure versus 965 bar impact force. That confirms the rivets were the weak link.
That's the crucial distinction, yes. The design of the ship, the steel plates, should have theoretically handled that glancing blow. But the material defect in those specific rivets meant they failed under pressure well below what they should have withstood.
So the iceberg didn't slice the steel.
No. It exerted immense pressure on the hull plates, and the weak, brittle rivets holding those plates together in the bow simply popped out along the seams. This created those small, scattered openings, adding up to only 1.2 square meters total, but crucially, spread across enough compartments to breach the ship's survivability limit.
So the final conclusion on the technical failure is?
The conclusion is pretty clear from the science. The high slag content in the wrought iron rivets used in the ship's bow was the single, almost imperceptible technical detail, a manufacturing flaw. That was the weak point that failed first, allowing the seams to open just enough for the critical 5 compartments to flood and ultimately doom the ship. A tiny detail with monumental consequence.
Absolutely chilling, a hidden flaw waiting for the worst possible moment. So the science explains the how. The rivets failed, the compartments flooded. But the next 2 hours and 40 minutes? That's pure human tragedy unfolding.
It really is. So, midnight strikes,
Huh?
00.00. Captain Smith gets the final confirmation from Thomas Andrews, the designer. 5 compartments are flooding, maybe 6.
And Andrews tells him.
The terrible truth. The ship is doomed. She can only stay afloat for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours maximum. Smith knows. He immediately orders the lifeboats to be uncovered and swung out.
Knowing full well there weren't enough boats.
Knowing he was essentially condemning more than half the people on board, the math was inescapable, not enough seats.
Then comes the call for help, the SOS.
Right. Around 0.15, maybe 0.25, they start sending out wireless distress calls, CQD, the old signal, and also SOS, which, interestingly, the sources note was one of the first prominent uses of the new international distress signal.
Who picks it up?
Several ships hear it, But the closest one that responds definitively is the Cunard liner, SS Carpathia. But she's far away.
Half.
About 93 kilometers or
Yeah.
58 nautical miles. Even racing at her risky top speed of 17 knots, much faster than her normal service speed.
It would take hours.
4 hours. Captain Rostron on the Carpathia knew immediately they wouldn't get there in time to save everyone, but he ordered everything thrown into the effort. Turned off heating to divert steam to the engines, posted extra lookouts.
He was taking a huge risk himself, wasn't he? Racing into an ice field at night?
An immense risk. Driving a large passenger ship full speed into an unmapped, dark ice field where the world's biggest ship had just sunk. It was incredibly dangerous navigationally. Every minute saved was a potential life saved, but the hazard was extreme.
Meanwhile, back on the Titanic, rockets are being fired.
Yes, starting around .45, white distress rockets fired at intervals to attract attention. An officer on the Titanic's bridge actually spots the lights of another ship off the port bow, maybe 10 kilometers away.
Could it have been the Californian?
Very possibly the stationary SS Californian. They try signaling it desperately with a Morse lamp, flashing distress signals, but they get no answer. Just silence from the distant lights.
Agonizing. And the situation on deck is getting worse.
Much worse. By 01.15, the forward tilt of the ship is becoming severe. Panic has started to set in, especially among those who realize the implications of the few lifeboats. And you get these chilling accounts like the postal clerks.
What happened to them?
The sources note they were last seen struggling in waist-deep freezing water in the ship's post office, trying to drag sacks of registered mail up to higher decks. They drowned attempting to save the mail. It shows this incredible, almost misplaced devotion to duty even in the final moments.
And the goodbyes. That story about Mary Smith.
Ah, yes. Lucian and Mary Smith, the wealthy newlyweds. It's profoundly heartbreaking. Around 01.30, the boat deck is chaotic. Lucian Smith, knowing as a man in first class his chances were slim under the women and children first rule, essentially forces his pregnant wife Mary into lifeboat number 6.
What were his last words to her?
Just a small, practical, intimate gesture of care in the midst of chaos. He reportedly told her, "Keep your hands in your pockets because it's cold." That was the last time she ever saw him. He went down with the ship, the father of their unborn child.
Oh, that's hard to hear.
Puts a human face on the statistics.
By 01.45, the last boats are going.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The last few lifeboats are launched, some perilously overcrowded, others still with empty seats. But over 1,500 people are still left on the rapidly sinking ship. The band is famously still playing.
And then the final moments, Captain Smith's last order.
Around 02.17, with the bridge starting to dip underwater, Smith reportedly tells the remaining crew every man for himself. His job was done. 3 minutes later, at 02.20 a.m. on April 15th, the Titanic gives a final lurch, the lights blink out, and she plunges into the freezing North Atlantic. Gone.
But the story doesn't end there. The scandal of the sinking really is the lifeboats and who got into them.
Absolutely. The class disparity in survival rates is stark and undeniable. That command, women and children first. It sounds noble, but it was applied inconsistently and had devastating consequences depending on which side of the ship you were on.
How so?
It came down to the interpretations of the 2 senior officers loading the boats. On the port side, you had Second Officer Charles Lightoller. He interpreted the rule with rigid literalness. Women and children only. No men allowed, even if there were empty seats, and no more women nearby wanted to go.
So boats left half empty.
Tragically, yes. Lifeboat #1, for example, later nicknamed the Millionaire's Boat or the Money Boat, was launched with only 12 people aboard. They had a capacity of 40. Lighttoller's strict adherence, combined with the understandable reluctance of some women to leave their husbands or board a tiny boat in the dark, meant hundreds of potential spaces were simply wasted.
But it was different on the other side.
Completely different on the starboard side, managed by First Officer William Murdoch. He seems to have taken a more pragmatic approach. Once the women and children who were present were loaded, he allowed men to fill the remaining empty spaces.
So his boats were fuller.
Generally, yes. Murdoch's boats launched much closer to capacity, saving significantly more lives overall. It's a stark illustration of how individual decisions and interpretations under extreme pressure had life or death consequences for hundreds.
And then there's the third-class passengers. Their struggle was compounded, wasn't it?
Hugely compounded. It wasn't necessarily always intentional malice keeping them below, but systemic roadblocks were definitely in place. Remember those locked gates and complex segregated corridors?
Right, for immigration control.
Yes, standard procedure due to U.S. immigration laws at the time, designed to segregate steerage passengers and contain potential outbreaks of diseases like tuberculosis before they could be processed at Ellis Island.
So even in an emergency.
Those physical barriers remained. It meant many third-class passengers were effectively trapped below decks for crucial early parts of the evacuation. They often didn't know what was happening, where to go, or how to even reach the boat deck until it was far, far too late. They were literally cut off from the rescue efforts by the ship's built-in socioeconomic infrastructure.
The survival statistics must reflect that terribly.
They're horrifying. They speak volumes about this societal failure. 2/3, 66% of the children traveling in third class died.
2/3 of the kids.
Yeah. In stark contrast, only one child died across both first and second class combined. One, your chances of survival were directly, brutally correlated with the price of your ticket, the deck you occupied.
It's just medieval almost.
It reflects the rigid class structure of the Edwardian era, starkly laid bare in a disaster.
And we have to talk about the most tragic missed rescue opportunity of all. The SS Californian.
Yes, the ship that saw the rockets. She was so close, only about 20 nautical miles, maybe 16 kilometers away. Stationary, stopped for the night, surrounded by the same ice field that trapped the Titanic.
But her radio was off.
Her radio operator, Cyril Evans, had been dismissed by Titanic's operator earlier and had shut down his set and gone to bed around 11:30 p.m. Captain Stanley, Lord of the Californian, had allowed this. He cut his ship off from the world at the worst possible moment.
But they saw the rockets, didn't they?
They did. Multiple officers on watch aboard the Californian saw the white rockets being fired from the large steamer nearby. They reported it to Captain Lord.
And he did nothing.
He didn't wake the radio operator. He didn't take significant action. Lord later claimed and maintained that his officers misinterpreted the rockets. They thought they might be company signals, maybe flares used to communicate between ships of the same line, or just celebratory fireworks, not distress signals.
A failure of initiative, leadership.
A catastrophic failure of initiative, curiosity, and leadership that night. If the Californian had understood, had turned its radio back on, or even just steamed cautiously toward the rockets, hundreds more lives might have been saved. They were that close.
And the sounds. Survivors described the sound after the ship went down.
Yes. Many survivors in the lifeboats recounted the final, terrifying aftermath. The collective sound of over 1,000 people dying in the freezing, -2-degree seawater. It wasn't just screaming. The sources describe it as this overwhelming continuous sound, a loud hum, or a single horrifying wail. Some called it a sarin ton, like thousands of voices blending into one unbearable noise across the water.
An auditory trauma.
One that haunted the survivors for the rest of their lives. The sheer scale of the loss, audible in the dark.
Until the Carpathia arrived.
Finally, yes. Around 4 a.m., the Carpathia reached the first lifeboat. By 4:30 a.m. on April 15th, she was pulling the first survivors aboard. In total, 705 people were rescued from the lifeboats by the Carpathia. Captain Rostron had risked everything, his ship, his crew, his career, and succeeded in saving everyone who had made it into a boat.
A true hero of the story.
Absolutely. And one last point from the wreck discovery. The ship breaking apart.
Right. The builders claimed it couldn't happen.
They were adamant the hull girder was too strong to break. But the wreck lies in two main pieces on the seabed. The forensic evidence is clear. Contrary to those claims, the Titanic did indeed fracture dramatically before sinking completely.
Where did it break?
The sources indicate the break occurred somewhere between the third and fourth funnels, probably initiating below the waterline as the immense stress built up. The flooded bow pulled the stern high out of the water, putting unbelievable bending forces on the midsection until the keel buckled and the hull ripped apart. Another myth shattered by the physical evidence.
Just layer upon layer of failure and tragedy.
Indeed. Technical, human, societal, all converging on one night.
Okay, so we have the science, the rivets, we have the operational failures, the speed, the ignored warnings, the radio silence, the lifeboats. But despite all that definitive evidence, the Titanic still attracts these persistent controversies and conspiracy theories, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The sheer scale of the disaster, the loss of life, the famous names involved, it seems to demand explanations beyond just brittle rivets and bad luck. People look for intention, for conspiracy.
Let's touch on a couple of the big ones you found in the sources. First, the Olympic swap theory. This one sounds wild.
It is pretty wild, yeah. This claim, which really gained traction decades after the sinking, suggests that the ship that sank wasn't the Titanic at all. it was secretly swapped with her older sister ship, the Olympic.
Why would they do that?
The alleged motive is pure insurance fraud. The theory goes that the Olympic had been severely damaged in a collision with a Royal Navy cruiser, the HMS Hawk, a few months earlier. Repairs were costly, and maybe the insurers weren't paying out satisfactorily. The Titanic, being brand new, was insured for a huge amount. So the idea is they swapped the identities, patched up the Olympic just enough, set her out as Titanic, and deliberately sank her to collect the insurance money on the new ship, while keeping the real, undamaged Titanic to sail later as the Olympic.
Okay, that's elaborate. What evidence do proponents cite?
They point to supposed minor differences in physical features between the two ships that were photographed before the voyage. Things like the configuration of windows on certain decks, the promenade deck being open on the Olympic initially and enclosed on the Titanic. They also seize on some confusion over the official hull numbers used during construction, 400 for Olympic, 401 for Titanic. They argue these discrepancies prove the wreck must be the older, damaged Olympic.
But what do actual maritime historians and experts say?
They universally dismiss it. The sources call the theory grotesque, ludicrous, pure invention.
Why so definitive?
The reason is simple and irrefutable. The physical evidence from the wreck itself. Every single identifiable artifact recovered from the seabed that bears a yard number, things like propeller blades, pieces of machinery, hull plating sections, consistently shows the number 401.
401, Titanic's number.
Titanic's yard number from Harland and Wolff. There's simply no ambiguity. The wreck, resting nearly 4 kilometers down at the bottom of the Atlantic, is unequivocally the RMS Titanic. The swap theory is just that a theory completely unsupported by the physical evidence.
Okay, so the swap theory is debunked by the wreck itself. But what about the financial conspiracy? This one feels maybe more plausible, or at least taps into anxieties about power and money.
It does. It's certainly more sophisticated and, frankly, darker. This theory posits that the sinking wasn't an accident, but was deliberately orchestrated by the powerful financier J.P. Morgan.
Who owned the White Star Line through his trust.
Exactly. The theory suggests Morgan arranged the sinking to eliminate powerful rivals who were vehemently opposing one of his major financial projects, the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States.
Who were these rivals supposed to be?
The targets cited are incredibly wealthy and influential men who happen to be on board. John Jacob Astor IV, Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's, and Benjamin Guggenheim. These three were among the 4 richest men on the ship, and crucially, they were all known, vocal opponents of the proposed Federal Reserve System, which they saw as consolidating too much financial power.
And Morgan himself.
Morgan, who was instrumental in pushing for the Fed, had originally booked passage on the Titanic's maiden voyage but canceled shortly before departure, citing illness. Proponents see this as suspicious timing. The theory is basically that the sinking was an elaborate assassination plot disguised as a maritime disaster.
Are there specific details that fuel this theory?
Yes, there are some controversial details and allegations that keep it alive. For instance, the fact that Isidor Straus's body was recovered relatively easily, despite reports he was deep inside the ship when it sank, leading to speculation about whether his body was treated differently, perhaps retrieved intentionally.
And the Astor story.
Yes, persistent, though likely apocryphal, stories circulated that John Jacob Astor's body was found with a crushed or broken jaw, suggesting maybe a violent struggle occurred on a lifeboat. The implication being he was perhaps physically prevented from being saved by someone acting on orders.
It's hard to prove or disprove these things definitively after so long.
Extremely difficult. But this narrative persists because it provides a motive rooted in power and greed. It shifts the blame from, random chance and brittle metal to a deliberate, malevolent human act. It suggests that immense wealth couldn't save these powerful men from an even more powerful hidden conspiracy. It's a compelling, if disturbing, story.
Moving beyond the sinking itself, there's also the issue of accountability, or the lack thereof, in the aftermath.
A huge issue. The official inquiries that followed, one British and one American, faced immediate problems. There were multiple contradictions in the testimonies from surviving crew members.
Especially about the engine orders.
Yes, particularly surrounding Murdoch's final orders. Did he order full astern or just stop engines? Some crew members testified they only received stop signals, not orders to reverse the engines, which might have affected the ship's turning ability. It suggests confusion or conflicting commands on the bridge in those critical seconds.
And the conduct of some officers, like Lightoller.
Deeply controversial, especially in hindsight. Second Officer Lightoller, who, as we discussed, strictly enforced women and children only on the port side, leaving boats half empty, survived the sinking. He was subsequently hailed as a hero in the British press for his stiff upper lip survival story.
But his actions cost lives.
His rigid interpretation almost certainly cost hundreds of lives that could have potentially been saved in those partially empty lifeboats he launched. Yet, the sources indicate he faced no official censure, no real consequences for decisions that arguably led to unnecessary deaths. Astor himself was reportedly denied entry to a boat by Lightoller.
And there were even reports of intimidation afterwards.
Yes, quite chilling reports. Some survivors, even those rescued in boats like Lifeboat #7, claimed they were pressured by White Star Line officials almost immediately upon reaching New York, or even aboard the rescue ship Carpathia, into signing documents, basically non-disclosure agreements about what they saw and experienced during the sinking.
Trying to control the narrative, limit liability.
It certainly suggests a concerted, immediate effort by the company management to suppress the full, potentially damaging operational story and control the narrative to limit their financial and legal liability.
So the official inquiries, were they effective?
They were effective in one sense. They led to safety reforms. But they were profoundly inadequate in establishing real accountability for the disaster itself. Their primary aim, explicitly stated, was not to prosecute those potentially responsible, but to learn lessons to prevent future accidents.
So key figures weren't even questioned.
Incredibly, no. J.T. Morgan, the owner, was never called to testify. Neither was Lord Peary, the head of the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast where the ship was built and where those rivets came from. The inquiries focused mainly on the actions of Captain Smith, who went down with the ship, and the officers on duty, and on technical reforms for the future. Powerful figures higher up the chain largely evaded public scrutiny or blame.
But those technical reforms did happen.
They did, and that's the positive legacy, if you can call it that. The Titanic disaster was such a shock to the world that it forced immediate, significant changes. The U.S. government quickly established the International Ice Patrol, operated by the Coast Guard, dedicated to tracking icebergs in the North Atlantic and broadcasting warnings to all ships. That still operates today.
And the lifeboat rules changed.
Fundamentally, the most direct change was that laws were passed globally mandating sufficient lifeboat capacity for every single person on board a passenger vessel. No more basing it on tonnage. Every soul had to have a potential seat.
So the worst peacetime shipping disaster in history.
Yeah.
At least it led to making the seas safer.
It did. Its grim legacy is literally built into the foundation of modern maritime safety regulations, a very hard lesson learned. #tag outro.
So we've completed our deep dive, and looking back, it's clear, isn't it? The disaster wasn't just about hitting an iceberg. It was, as you said earlier, a perfect storm.
Absolutely. A confluence of factors. You had the technical hubris, the overconfidence manifested in that systemic weakness, the brittle wrought iron rivets failing under pressure.
Then the critical human miscommunications, the whole MSG protocol failure with the Californian's warning, which was technically ignored but shouldn't have been, and then the catastrophic inaction of the Californian itself later on.
Right. And all of this layered on top of those outdated safety practices. The grossly inadequate lifeboat capacity, the accepted dangerous operational norm of steaming too fast through known ice zones. It all lined up.
And the stories, whether they're the factual accounts of bravery and loss or the more mythic conspiracy theories, they continue to captivate us over a century later. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because they encompass the ultimate human drama, don't they? You have the stark realities of class division played out in life-or-death terms. You have moments of incredible heroism right alongside cowardice or incompetence. And ultimately, it's a story about the limits of human technology when pitted against the raw, indifferent power of nature. It hits on very fundamental themes.
Okay, so here's the final provocative thought for you, our listener, to maybe mull over. We've seen the clear, definitive, modern scientific evidence pointing to a specific metallurgical flaw, that high slag content in the rivets, as the ultimate physical cause of why the ship sank the way it did.
The science seems pretty solid now.
Yet these powerful conspiracy theories persist, focusing on financial motives, on deliberate sinking, on powerful people being eliminated. It seems to suggest that maybe as a society we struggle more with the idea of knowledge being misused, or safety being ignored for commercial gain or power, more than we struggle with accepting a terrible random industrial accident caused by a hidden flaw.
It's easier to blame a villain than brittle metal, perhaps.
Maybe. So what stands out more to you after hearing all this? Is it the definitive science that finally pinpointed those brittle rivets? Or is it the compelling, much darker narrative of human corruption, power struggles, and potential conspiracy that continues to swirl around the Titanic a century later? Which story resonates more? Something to think about.
Thanks for watching. If you're ready to question what you've always been told, hit subscribe and stay curious. New episodes every week. Uncover the stories history tried to hide.